Coldcut.
I'm Jonathan Moore of Coldcut.
And we've been messing around with sound for 14 years now, since 1987 when we did our first record, To Say Kids What Time Is It? And we come from the DJing, dance music, club, warehouse, mix it up kind of background.
We're also label owners of Ninja Tune, along with Peter Quick, which is our own independent label, which features funky artists like
Amon Tobin, Kid Koala, DJ Food,
Cinematic Orchestra,
Funky
and
Porcini.
many more.
Indeed.
Bustling Out, Big Dada, our hip-hop division. So yeah, been involved deeply in the music biz for quite some time.
Fantastic. So the Guilty Party. So how did you start that? Whose idea was it, and what was the idea behind it?
Well, the idea behind the Guilty Party was to have a sort of vehicle to help us promote our single, Revolution, which we did just before the election. And we wrote down a list of different sorts of parties, like the Good Party, the Free Party, and the Guilty Party was the one we came up with, because in the track Revolution we've got Haig and various other politicians saying things like cronyism and favours guilty. And of course they're talking about themselves, really. They're the Guilty Party, so we thought we'd appropriate that and shine it up and put it into bed with Coldcut.
Yeah, and the single Revolution was a reaction really to the election going on. It had started some time ago. We were on tour and we had some clips of various politicians, particularly one of Tony Blair going, "The lunatics have taken over the asylum." And we were actually touring in America at the time, and we'd taken a lot of clips of Bush and Gore and did a little political mix for the Americans live when we were on tour, and it went down
during
very
their
well.
election.
Yeah, during their election. It went down very well. We had people on their back in hysterics at some of it. And it just seemed a sensible thing to do with the election coming on, and with the political parties acting pretty much as if they're a sort of pop group by the way they use the media and the whole presentation and marketing opportunities, etc., which they undertook to get their brand across. We thought we'd return the compliment and use them.
Make that point that they are politicians and just trying to play the game as if it was a sort of top of the pops entertainment spectacular, which is not really, what they're there for. They're supposed to be doing their job, not just convincing people of how excellent they are. So, yeah, that turned into a Revolution, and the Guilty Party was a vehicle that we put on to that. And then that resulted in our involvement with the Bob Posse and the Free Party.
Yeah, moving on to that, how did that come about? I mean, who contacted who?
Well, we met the Slack Posse in Brighton, who the Guilty Party is the same tribe basically, a few years ago, and being quite into Bob ourselves, the Church of the Subgenius and the whole American connection. But it was in Brighton really that took hold most strongly in the UK, and obviously the Slack parties are well known. That tradition of free parties is something that John and I are well into, and also the sort of two fingers up to the authorities and think for yourself being the main message really behind it, I reckon. So we were aware of that crew anyway, and people like Timmy Wobble we know through other connections. And we decided to do this bus stunt, basically as a publicity thing for the single, and to hire an open-top double-decker and drive around London harassing people through megaphones and handing out leaflets and parodying the
kissing babies, all that
indeed,
kind of
dropping
stuff.
babies.
Being seriously politic.
But we were asked, are you actually going to stand for Parliament? And well, we thought standing sounded a bit too much like hard work, so we might sit for Parliament. But
Or lie down.
Lie down and be counted, as Morris would say. But it was a good question. It's like, well, why are you pretending to be a political party if you're actually not? John and I kind of felt that the political statement that we wanted to make, because life is political and there is a political consciousness in what Coldcut do, but we weren't actually prepared to get up there and say we're standing. But the Free Party were actually fielding these three candidates, the brothers of Bob, Jim Dobbs, Dave Dobbs, and Simon Dobbs, and we thought, that's a statement worth supporting, that actually they're going to put these candidates up and take it that little bit further and, push it as far as it can go. So as we're pretty much on a similar tip, philosophically speaking, it seemed a good idea to combine the forces of Slack with the Coldcut, mix it up.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Church of the Subgenius earlier on. philosophies of theirs which you obviously slackness, apart from that you agree with?
I think slack is the sort of key tenet of the Church of the Subgenius, which we relate to, really.
It's our principal objective.
Indeed, yeah, you can't argue. We do need more slack, and the conspiracy, the con, is well in effect, and those truths are pretty self-evident, really.
The slack stealers are all around, in fact.
Fuck them if they can't take a joke. You know, there has to be an alternative to the sort of mainstream party political domination. We wanted to put the party back in the political process, and I think Bob is about that, really.
Okay, to get your feelings on like any particular high points, can you describe the kind of atmosphere, particularly in the ocean rooms kind of thing on election day?
Well, the whole campaign had some really good moments, actually. I mean, we were very lucky to get a superb sunny day to drive around on the double-decker bus. If it had been pissing with rain, it could have been a bit sad, I think. But actually, we had a wonderful time, and
it was brilliant. Yeah, I got off at Smith Square and took a copy of the video and the record and our manifesto into Tory Party HQ, which was very funny because I just walked in and they were really very much like a bunch of headless chickens. Nobody seemed to know what was going on. I stood about for a bit with my stuff, waiting for somebody to sort of say, "Oh, you, what are you doing in here?" And then eventually a woman came out from the back and I said, "I've brought these for whoever your leader is." And she said, "Oh, I'll put them in William's pigeonhole," which I thought was really, really funny. It was just brilliant. Yeah, totally brilliant. And then I walked out again. That was one very funny moment for me.
You do get, you know, there was an actual possibility of testing the flavour of what was going down a bit more intimately than you just get from the newspapers by actually going around. I mean, I'd never been to Conservative Party headquarters or Labour Party headquarters, and actually seeing these bods there and seeing, you know, what sort of game it all was, really. And as John says, how no one really seemed to have a clue what was going on. And the police at the various places we visited, has to be said, were quite reasonable.
Yeah, no, they were really interested. I think our policy of comfortable shoes for policemen, if we were elected as the Free Party, went down very well. And obviously we need to get the police on our side because they're important.
But we suggested that they have some nice pink uniforms, but they didn't seem
No, they declined that
keen.
offer. But they did quite happily take our stuff in for Tony as well. So hopefully he got down with the sound.
Yeah, I want to go back to actually at some point about...
Could we just answer a bit more on what you were saying? Because the Timmy Wobble on the megaphone kept us entertained the whole day long. He really is a top rantmeister in the great tradition of subgenius popes, I think. So respect to him, definitely. The gig at the Ocean Rooms was absolutely brilliant. It was a really good crowd, and there was an excitement there and the feeling that, you know, we're doing something that's fun and has a serious side to it as well, and we can enjoy ourselves together. So John and I do get approached to do a lot of gigs, you know, either paid gigs and charity stuff, but this was a lot more fun than a lot of them, to be quite honest. And all the Bob iconography and the decorations and everything looked really good. But it was after that it really kicked off when we all went down to the Count at the Brighton Civic Centre or wherever it was. And, you know, the other political parties ought to sort of take a leaf out of the Free Party book, really, because if you want to actually have your posse down there and be the loudest, it'd be a good idea to have a party that evening so everyone's a bit, you know, a bit jived up for it. And the Free Party pretty much dominated the proceedings.
I think that's a bit of an understatement.
To the extent that the Labour and Tory bods actually lost it quite badly. I filmed them getting the hump, and, you know, not just with the Free Party, but the Tory Party couldn't basically handle the fact that they'd lost and was like screeching, "Tony Blair's conned you, and I will be back in 3 years." And he could hardly have painted himself in more kind of as a better parody, really. But that was quite exciting. There was a moment when our lot were getting quite leery, and the police were looking a bit edgy, and then they faded out and were replaced by a load more police in sort of flak jackets who were a lot more chilled, actually, because they could see that, you know, they had the confidence that no one was really going to fuck with them. You know, they had their equipment and they were in effect, so that was quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really good atmosphere down there. I mean, Jim got a 300% increase in his votes compared to the last time he stood.
Right.
So, do you think you'd comment on why you think maybe independent parties this time round seem to do a lot better?
I think it's a general move in that direction. I mean, there's a lot more independent record labels. There's still a lot of independent party makers and party goers, people that don't follow the kind of major, corporate disco line.
That's been very noticeable this summer.
That's come back, a big thing. I think it's just the same process. It's this disagreement, really, with being farmed like an aphid by an ant.
People wake up to it eventually, or some people wake up, more people wake up to it and say, hold on a minute, there's got to be an alternative.
I'm not your teat.
The alternative's not coming from the mainstream and the corporate, so you have to do it yourself. And I think, as John says, more independent record labels, that DIY attitude which Ninja have with music, which has become quite popular. It's like, yeah, you know how to do it better yourself than these guys. Just take responsibility and just do it yourself and own it. And I think that there are more and more people doing that. The direct action movement, I think, has had a lot to do with that as well, because it just doesn't seem to work going through the appropriate channels. Because, as you say, our masters and rulers are just farming us, basically, and the aphids need to take over the asylum, to mix the metaphor, you know what I mean?
Sure. Finally, I've been asked to get your comments on there's a few questions which come up from the Free Party, and they want your comments on some of their manifestos and what you think of them as well. So one of the questions first is...
I think it would be very hard to argue with the manifesto point that one should cannibalise legalists.
Yeah,
definitely.
That's a brilliant one.
That was one of them. You've done that one then. But this is a question.
Absolutely. I think it's very important,
Obviously, the full panoply of armaments, as manufactured by our wonderful companies like British Aerospace, should be made available to bears of all types, regardless of race, colour or creed.
Or religion.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I reckon that...
That's creed, John.
Not necessarily, not in bears.
Okay, you've done the cannibalised legalist one, which is a great one. A few other ones. There was one about, they reckon they should have a panel of judges to judge graffiti, and any repeat offenders of crap tags should have it tattooed on their forehead.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. I agree with that totally. It's very sad, the sort of incoherent graffiti that you see around you. I think it's very important that the Free Party stands by their policy of tattooing that inept art on the perpetrator's foreheads, basically, don't you think?
Definitely, yes. Crap tags should be tattooed on the foreheads of the offending toys. Would make society a much, much better place, I think. As indeed would forcing politicians to wear all the logos of the companies which sponsor them, like racing drivers, would be a great step forward, I think.
Okay, right. Here's another one. They reckon the House of Lords should be selected by a scratch card lottery system.
I think the idea that the House of Lords should be selected by a scratch card lottery system is a bit sort of old school, really. I think the House of Lords should be selected by a scratch DJ competition, would be a bit more appropriate.
Good. This one's a weird one, but they like this one. Do you think workers in the agricultural and farming communities should have free access to brothels to cut down on animal disease? Apparently there's been a complaint of salty beef.
I think we just have to put that down to personal choice. You're not seriously expecting us to include that question in our answer, are you?
That's fair enough.
Censored.
And finally, the Free Party, they actually sponsor Brighton FC Football Club. And they chose Brighton FC because they are the worst football club ever and have not actually ever won a game. What do you think, sport and politics? Is it a good mix?
Sport and politics, that's a difficult one. I'm particularly unfond of sport of most types. The sort of sport I enjoy is hunting records. So I personally think politics and sport don't mix. I don't think it's very healthy.
I think really all politicians should really resolve their differences by kind of ninja kung fu throwdown before the massive would solve a lot of problems.
That's a jolly good idea. It's funny because the seats in the House of Commons are a sword's stretch apart, apparently. That's why it's laid out like that.
What, in case anyone gets a bit worked up?
Gets a bit worked out and whips out their sword and, decides to behead a member.
Oh, well, that's great.
But if Brighton FC are the crappiest football team in the world, then I'll support
Good luck to them.
It was because of their particular slackness is why they were chosen.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and the fact that they could beat them themselves, which they did, in fact. Okay, guys, that's lovely.
Okay.
Thank you very much.